Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Metzia Daf Tzadi Aleph. We're going to start with where we left off. We're going to jump to a bunch of different topics today. We're going to get very off topic into some things that may be a little graphic relating to animals. So I will warn you, but we'll get there soon and in a kind of seemingly unrelated manner. Unclear why these sugyo come up by us. I mean, I'll explain to you technically, but it still seems a little bit strange. So we start off with this machloket, Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish that we saw at the end of yesterday's daf. What if you muzzle your animal by speech? You tell your animal, don't eat. Okay, so Rabbi Yochanan says, it's forbidden, you get lashes for it. Okay, you're chayav. And we said, because akimat piv havya maaseh, and we suggested, according to Tosfot, at least that it's words that actually caused an action, caused the animal to stop. Rish Lakish says you're exempt, speech is not an action, and therefore there's no lashes for it. Eitive Rabbi Yochanan Rish Lakish. Last words of Tzadi Amud Bet. Rabbi Yochanan asked Rish Lakish the following question. It says in the following Mishnah, and in fact, we'll start with Rashi, who quotes the beginning of the Mishnah, and we're now on a totally different topic called Tmura, which is if I designate an animal to be a sacrifice, okay, to be used for a sacrifice, and then I change my mind. I say, I don't want that animal, I want a different animal. I say, I'm going to move the sanctity from this animal to another, whether the Torah says, lo yamir, you can't do this. Bein tov l'ra, bein ra l'tov. It doesn't matter if I'm moving it to a better animal. It doesn't matter if I'm moving it to a worse animal. Either which way, it's forbidden. However, okay, so let's just look at the Mishnah in Rashi. The first line in Rashi here, I'm skipping two words. Hakom mimirim echad ha'anashim ve'echad ha'nashim. Everyone can do this. Now, what does it mean they can do it? It doesn't make sense. They can't do it. It says, according to the Torah, you can't do it. Well, now comes the Mishnah to explain. This is what we're reading right now in our Gemara now, back to the Gemara. Lo, because we got kind of mid-sentence. Lo she'adam rashai lahamil. Not that a person is actually allowed to. When it says hakom mirim, men, women, anyone can do tmura. Okay, tmura literally means substitution, which is exactly what we're doing. We're substituting one animal for another. Just wait, we have a whole mesechet called tmura. We'll get there in a bunch of years. But what it means is that if you did it, it's effective, meaning that you did manage to transfer the sanctity to another animal, which doesn't mean transfer in terms of you removed it from one, put it on the other, but you actually kind of like you move a flame from one candle to another. The flame is still in the first candle. So the sanctity is still in the first animal, but you've also managed to create sanctity in the second animal. The second animal is sanctified. So that's what it means. If you did it, it's effective. This sofeget arba'im. And in addition, by the way, you get lashes. Now, this is the important part for our purposes. Because Rabbi Yochanan says, look, here you have a case where somebody said something in words. Basically, I said, I want the sanctity of this animal to move on to that animal. Actually, right, I didn't take the sanctity out and move it to another animal. There is no such thing. Right? It's not like a candle where I actually physically did an action. Here I just spoke. Amar le. So the response of Rabbi Rish Lakish is, Hamani, Rabbi Yehuda Hida, Amar lav she'im b'maaseh lokin alav. This concept that we always say, lav she'im b'maaseh, if you just speak, generally that's what it means. Transgressing a negative prohibition when you actually don't do an action, you don't get lashes for. Well, actually, Rabbi Yehuda disagrees, and he thinks you get lashes for it. So Rish Lakish will say, oh, don't worry, that Mishnah follows Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, and therefore it's not a difficulty because you're questioning me from those who say you don't get lashes. So, right, in other words, again, I say what Rish Lakish basically, I hold they don't get lashes, but you're questioning me from some source. That source follows a different opinion that I don't hold by, that says you do get lashes. To which they say, wait a minute, you want to establish that Mishnah by Rabbi Yehuda? We've got a different problem because if we keep reading, okay, we go back to the Mishnah, we read the part we didn't read. Could you really say that Mishnah follows Rabbi Yehuda to resolve this contradiction? The beginning part of that Mishnah, as we know, says, Hakol mimirin echad hanashim ve'echad hanashim. Right, both men and women, if they do tmura, it's forbidden, right? They're going to get lashes, and also it's effective. It works. Now they question that Mishnah and they said, why does it say hakol? You could have just said, echad anashim, echad nashim mimirim. Why did you have this, right? Which would mean basically men and women, all of them can do tmura. Okay. Now, why do you add the word hakol? Everyone can, men and women. You don't need to say everyone and then say men and women. Everyone obviously includes men and women. So what's the hakol coming to include? La tuye yoresh udelo Rabbi Yehuda. To say, even if you inherited an animal, if your father designated an animal as a sacrifice, and then your father died before he brought it, you inherited that animal, and now you want to switch it because you want that animal for yourself, and you switch it. So in this case, Rabbi Yehuda, okay, and they're going to say even a yoresh, if the yoresh does tmura, substitution, the substitution will be effective. The kedusha will move to the other animal. This does not hold by Rabbi Yehuda. De'ike Rabbi Yehuda ha'amal yoresh eno memil, yoresh eno somech. Rabbi Yehuda has two halachot, one connected to what we just said, and one another halacha about an heir. If an heir takes the sacrifice, that the animal that the father wanted to sacrifice but never did, and does substitution, it's actually not effective. The yoresh, the heir, can't move sanctity from that animal to another. And yoresh, in other words, again, can't doesn't mean it's forbidden, can't means it's ineffective. And yoresh eno somech, if the father designated an animal for a sacrifice, let's say a korban shlamim, and a peace offering, and the child wants to bring it to the temple and offer it as the father wanted, so he doesn't do smicha, which is when you put your weight on the animal, you kind of like push down on the animal. Since it wasn't his sacrifice to begin with, he doesn't do smicha. Those are two opinions about Rabbi Yehuda. Second one isn't relevant here, but the first one basically proves that the Mishnah, at least the way we understood it, that hakol comes to include the yoresh. It never said it explicitly in the Mishnah. But if you assume that hakol comes to include the yoresh, then this Mishnah doesn't follow Rabbi Yehuda. So Rish Lakish's explanation that, oh, this Mishnah follows Rabbi Yehuda, that's why you get lashes, doesn't work because of the yoresh issue. To which we have a pretty simple answer. Hi, Tana Savar Lakabate B'chada, Upalagale B'chad. Fine, it wasn't authored by Rabbi Yehuda, because you can't have Rabbi Yehuda the author of this Mishnah, because part of it doesn't match Rabbi Yehuda, the word hakol. But you could say that it was a different Tana who held like Rabbi Yehuda on the Lav She'en Bo Maaseh issue, and didn't hold like Rabbi Yehuda on the yoresh, the heir issue. And that's a very simple way to explain it, and then Rish Lakish doesn't have an issue. Moving on now to a different source. Now we're going to bring a bright and a different issue. Okay, that's pretty clear. You muzzled an animal. We already said that this is the source, as we ended yesterday's class. This is the source for lashes, because it appears in the verse right after we talk about lashes. It's a lo taseh, don't muzzle your animal while it's threshing. If you did it, basically you get lashes. But in addition, and here comes the problem, mishalem arba'a kabin lepara shlosha kabin lechamor. And what I didn't tell you is, what we're talking about here is, I rented your animal and I threshed with your animal while I muzzled your animal. Now, what did I do when I did this? I prevented your animal from eating, which means that you now are going to have to feed your animal. You gave it to me for 5 hours during lunchtime, right? The animal usually eats then. So when I return your animal is starved because I muzzled your animal and is now going to eat all this food that, you kind of probably included in the rental. You deducted a little for the fact that the animal was going to eat, right? I pay X amount for what the animal's going to do, but included in that is the fact in that price is that I'm going to have to pay some money to put out food for the animal. So again, you probably deducted a little bit for that reason. Well, in this case, your animal didn't eat, which it should have. So I have to compensate you financially by giving you 4 kav, let's say of wheat probably, for if it's a cow, 3 kav for a chamor, because a cow eats more than a donkey. The expected amount, okay, this obviously depends on how long they were working and whatever, but this is an amount they give. There's a certain measurement that you give for each animal. That the assumption is, I starved that animal from eating that amount of food. I have to compensate the owner. Well, here's a big problem. There's something called, the Gemara doesn't call it by name, but it's called kimle b'derabba mineh. When I do an action, it's a very famous sugya. Hopefully, in the next day or two, there'll be a gefet on this. I know it was just recorded in Hebrew, but hopefully there'll be an English translation of Rabbi Chana Dreyfus' shiur. You can look at the Hebrew. It'll be up sometime later today. I'm not sure when the English is coming in, but about the whole concept of kimle b'derabba mineh and how does this work? Okay, it's a fascinating topic. There's a lot of in-depth about it. So this shiur will be a little of a certain, slice of the topic, which is when somebody does one action that has two punishments associated with it. We say, Kim le b'derabba mineh. You get the more severe punishment. Okay, we don't punish you by both. You don't get two punishments. Okay, usually the classic case is, let's say you steal on Shabbat, so you're chayav for Shabbat, which you get skila for, you get the death penalty, so we're not going to also make you pay for the item you stole. Okay, this is a little unfair to the person who it was stolen from, right? But we'll talk about that maybe in a bit. So basically what happens here? You get lashes and you have to pay for the same exact action. Okay, this all comes from Pasuk, at least one of the sources, Kedei Rishato. They give him according to his evil deed, which means Risha'achat, and not on Shtei Rishuyot. Okay, not two bad actions. So you can only get judged on one. The court can only impose one punishment. They're always going to take the more b'derabba mineh, the greater one. So now what should be here? What's greater? Lashes, because that's a physical pain they're inflicting. You don't both get lashes and death penalty. If you did something that requires death penalty and lashes, you're only going to get the death penalty. And they know you don't get lashes and also pay. So how could you both get lashes and pay for the same action? We're going to have three different answers. Abai, Rava, and Rav Papa are each going to suggest a different answer. Abai is going to answer in the same way that we answered the question of Rish Lakish a minute ago, or a few minutes ago, which is, Amar Abaye, Hamani, Rabbi Meir, Hida, Amar, Lokel, Mishalem. When we say Kim Lebi Rabbi Mine, it doesn't mean a case of lashes and payment. Lashes and payment can go together according to Rabbi Meir. So one option is to say, this follows Rabbi Meir's opinion. And with that, we can say, okay, don't worry that normally we say you don't do both, because this is a following Rabbi Meir's opinion, and that would be the way to resolve this source. Okay. Amar Rava Amal, Etnan Asra Torah va'afilu ba'alimo. This is a little more complicated to understand. What this means is, Etnan is a gift that one gives to a prostitute. In Etnan, that a gift that one gives to a prostitute, let's say you give a prostitute an animal, you can't bring that animal on the altar. That's disgusting, right? It doesn't belong in the temple. What if you, a boy, engage, or a man, engage in sexual relations with his mother? Now, what happens if he, in prostitution, and gave her a gift in payment for the prostitution? Okay, a hard case to imagine would happen, but could be just theoretical, or maybe it could happen in some weird kind of case. But the boy, or the again, we'd have to be an older boy. Okay, so a man engages in prostitution with his mother and gives her a gift. Now, if he doesn't, now when he gives her this, or not a gift, he gives her payment, right? If it was payment for the prostitution, then it can't be brought as a sacrifice, even though he's liable the death penalty. Now, what does that have to do with anything? Well, if he's liable the death penalty, let's say he doesn't pay her. She goes to the court and says, you owe me money. Can she get the money? No, because she's going to say, you owe me money because of this sexual relations that we had. But he's already liable the death penalty for that same act. So he's not going to be liable to pay her. And yet, if the court can't impose that, okay, enforce it, well, what happens though? It's still, if he gives it to her, let's say he gave it to her, it wasn't that, yeah. If we call this an etnan, then it's forbidden for a sacrifice. And we do call an etnan, it's forbidden for a sacrifice. If we actually paid her, then you can't bring that, she can't bring that animal as a sacrifice to the temple. Okay, now, why is that? If he doesn't really owe her the money because of Kim Lebi Rabba Mineh, and the court can't impose it, then it should just be viewed as a gift. It shouldn't be viewed as an etnan. So what does this show? Well, according to Rashi, and this is really the Rashi that the Shir of Rabbi Chana Dreyfus kind of pulls on, according to Rashi, he has a chiyuv l'pei shmayim. In other words, he committed to pay something. He still has to pay it, even though the court can't impose it, and the court can't say you have to. But if you want to do the right thing, and maybe this goes back to the thief, if somebody stole on Shabbat and doesn't have to pay back what they stole, or doesn't have to pay, let's say, the double payment, right? Maybe it's a question about the stolen item, maybe it has to be returned anyway, or maybe not. But let's put that issue aside. But why should the person, okay, if there's any kind of situation where you're not going to have to pay, someone else on the other side is being penalized for that, for no reason really, just because the court can't enforce the penalty? So what this is saying is, when you chosem a para, the court can't court can't force you to pay. But if you want to do the right thing, and that's how Rava understands it. That the etnan asrat Torah, it's going to be forbidden anyway, because the fact is he still owes her the money. Whether the court can enforce it or not is a separate question. But he still really owes her the money from, again, you could call it klapei shamayim, but in some way, he still really owes that money. So that's Rava's explanation. Rav Papa gives a third answer. And this is a classic thing that comes up whenever we have a case of Kimle and there's some sort of problem. How could it be both? If the obligation to pay doesn't happen at the same time as the obligation to get killed or the obligation to whatever it is that don't happen, in this case, the lashes, don't happen at the exact same moment, then there's not Kimle. Because one moment you were obligated in this and the other you were obligated in that. So now they say the following. From when are you obligated to feed this animal? Well, you're actually obligated to feed the animal as soon as you take the animal. I rent the animal from you and I pull the animal. I assume responsibility that I'm going to feed the animal. That comes in at moment one. Later on, when I muzzle the animal and then take it to work, then I'm over on the lota saying I'm obligated lashes. But the obligation to already give food for this animal kicked in way earlier. And that's why we can obligate me in both. So that's Rav Papa's answer. I'm obligated in mizono from the moment I pull the animal. But the lashes only come in at shach chasima, when the animal was muzzled. Okay, so like I said, if you want to learn more about this method of how Kimle actually works and a much more in-depth analysis, Gefa will be discussing that this week, which hopefully will go up, and not sure exactly when, but Bezrat Hashem in the next few days. Amar Rav Papa. Now we're moving on to a totally different topic. Because we have Rav Papa here, it seems, we're now going to see two things Rav Papa ruled about. One according to halacha, one not really according to halacha, which means basically it wasn't really forbidden by halacha, but I'm going to forbid it anyway. So why this is here, I don't really know, because Rav Papa's name comes up many, many times in Shas, and they don't happen to mention these two things every time they mention his name. So why? Just because he was mentioned here, and these are mentioned, you can try to think of some reasons on your own. Amar Rav Papa. Okay, so I was asked the following questions, and the following two questions, and I ruled you cannot do them. I prohibited them. One, I prohibited according to the letter of the law, and one I prohibited not according to the letter of the law, meaning it's really permitted, but I told them they shouldn't do it. So let's see what the questions were. Two totally different questions. And again, not really connected at all to our topics, other than one has to do with animals, but that's about it. Can you knead your dough with milk? Can you make dairy bread? And I said, no, by halacha, it's not allowed. Ditanya, you can't make dairy bread. If you did it anyway, you kneaded the dough with milk. It's forbidden. What are we worried about? All bread looks the same. And therefore, people might think that it's parv and they'll eat it with their meat and you'll have a problem. And likewise, don't smear fat from the tail of the animal. It must have been something people did on the walls of your oven and then bake bread. And if you did it, any bread you make in it is now meat. And therefore, again, you might eat it with something dairy. And therefore, it's forbidden until you light up you have to burn it off. This is like how we kosher an oven, right? We burn it, we have it go for a while to burn off all the fat, and only after that. So this is a very famous source. Big question, right? Well, nowadays people do make dairy bread. How do you do it? So the Gemara and Pesachim talked about that you can actually make it look different if you make a different shape, if it's known, right? This is why Berekesim in Israel, the triangle ones are always the cheese and the rectangle ones are always the potato ones and the parv ones. It's a known thing, and this has to do with this kind of topic, even though it's not bread, but in order to make it clear that it has to be done differently. That was the first question. Idach, okay, there's a whole interesting halachic whatever about this. So anyone who's interested, you can research it, but it comes from here. Id and a sugim psachim. Idach ba'uminan. Second question they asked me, and here we get more graphic. We know that we're not yet graphic yet. Can you put two different, now there's a pasuk that says, you can't crossbreed animals. You can't basically cause two different animals. We're going to see exactly what the Isur is, to mate with each other, like a a donkey and a cow. Okay, you can't put them together. Now, can you put them in a pen together and worry that maybe they'll mate with each other? Is that your fault if they do? And I said it's forbidden. You can't put two different types of animals in a pen together because they might engage in mating. But it's not lahalacha, meaning it's really permitted. How do we know this? Well, the Amar Shmuel said, okay, this is a totally different issue. If you're going to testify about someone who engaged in adultery, two people, well, you don't have to actually see them engage in the act of intercourse, but you have to see them in bed together in a way that they could theoretically have been engaged in sexual relations. You don't have to actually see everything going on there. But kilayim, when it comes to kilayim, now here we're not talking about witnesses. Okay, that was talking about witnesses. If you witness and you want to convict them in court, you don't need to actually see the act in action. But kilayim, you're not liable for mating animals until what stage? Until, okay, this is a euphemism, until the organ of the male organ goes into the female's body. Okay, they use a mikol b'shvoferet, which is a brush into a tube. Okay, the way a brush would fit into a tube, unless you physically make that happen, there's no problem. So that's why he says this isn't a halacha, because just putting them in a pen is way far off from actually causing the action to happen. But Mantiv Rabbi Achtavoy Bar Ami, he questions this statement we just said about the Adshi Yachnis Kimikol B'Shvoferet. Ilu ne'emar behemtecha lo tarbia, hayiti omer lo yochaz adam behema b'sha'a she'oleh aleh hazachar. Talmud lomar kilai. This is a source that says, if it had said in the pasuk behemtecha lo tarbia, and it didn't say the word kilayim, harbia is to engage in relations, right, or mating. So if you would say don't mate your animals, what would you think? That you can't hold down the female animal while the male animal is trying to do its thing and make sure she stays in place so that the animals mate. That's what you would have thought. But then it adds the word kilayim, which comes to teach you lav michlal, okay, which comes to teach you, no. It's not about not holding down the female animal while the male animal is coming on her, but it's don't crossbreed two different types. Now, what does that seem to imply? Lav michlal de kilayim achiza nami lo. Now, it sounds like you can't, what can't you do then? What did we explain behem techalo tarbiyah before we had the kilayim word that means holding down the female while the male comes into her, which means it's not actually what's forbidden about kilayim, even holding her down in place, holding her in place in and of itself is usher, but not necessarily, right? What did Shmuel say? Until you actually machnis kimikol shvoferet, you actually have to cause the act to happen. This is not causing the act to happen. This is just helping it. So in other words, what they thought was maybe it's a problem with all animals. And then they said, no, it's only a problem with kilayim, different breeds. So now that's a problem with different breeds. What we're basically saying is, since it's a problem with different breeds, what's the problem? No, the problem is to hold down the female animal in place. But that's a less invasive stage than actually making it happen. Now, Shmuel said you're only obligated when you make it happen. This seems to say just holding it would be a problem. So that's his contradiction, to which the Gemara says, what do you mean, Maya Chiza, when it says that Braita said holding down, it didn't mean holding her. It meant hachnasa. It meant making the action happen. Amai kari lachiza, lishna ma'alya. Well, if you're uncomfortable with this topic, so were they. They say, don't call it hachnasa. Okay, now they're actually getting graphic, but they're saying the Braita didn't because the Braita wanted to speak in euphemistic language, didn't want to actually spell it all out. It was just unpleasant, so they didn't say it. But le'echos really meant to make it happen, okay? That's how they explain it. We're going to come back to this source in another minute, because this again is going to, we're going to bring a different halacha, and Rav Achtavoy again is going to quote this source to raise a difficulty with this other halacha. So that was Rav Papa's halacha, where again, Rav Papa said, it's actually not a problem to put these two animals, different types, in a pen, but I'm going to forbid it so that people don't end up crossbreeding their animals. But the reason why it's not forbidden in the halacha is because of what Shmuel said, which is, unless you cause the action to happen, you're actually not, you physically make them mate, you're actually not obligated if they do it on their own, or if, you even just are partially involved, That's fine. And that seemed to contradict this other source, but no, because that other source, when it said le'echoz, it didn't really mean le'echoz, it meant lachnis, to actually put it in, to insert it. Now comes Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda says a different halacha, which again, Rav Achtavoy is going to question from the same source. Mim bimino mutar lachnis kimekol b'shofar. Different halacha. You have a horse, male and female. You can actually put them kimekol b'shofar. You can actually cause them to mate without a problem. And it's not like it's an inappropriate thing to watch because it might cause you to have bad thoughts, thoughts of other women or something. My timer, because you're doing a job. You're mating your animals. You're focusing on the action of causing your animals to mate, to have offspring. You're not thinking about, what if it were me and some woman or man. So that's okay. In which case comes Rav Achtavoy and says, wait a minute. Mativ Rav Achtavoy for Ami. And now he's going to look at the source from a bit of a different perspective. With this, we move to Amud Bet. Ilu ne'emar, and he's going to quote the exact same source. If it had said behem tachalo tarbiyah hayiti omer lo yochaz adam tabei makadesh yaleh ala zachar, I would have thought that it's forbidden for you to hold this animal so that the zachar comes. Talmud lomar kilayim, which comes to teach you it's really only kilayim that's a problem, which means kilayim hu da'aser hamim b'mino shari. Now, in this way, of which way? Achiza, meaning holding the female in place, but not the way we think originally when we read this source, not actually hachnasa. Okay, what comes out of here is kilayim, crossbreeding animals is forbidden, taking, two different types. Actually, holding her down would be forbidden. But if it's mim bimino, a female and a male horse, no problem. Okay, you can do that. You can hold her in place while the male comes on her. But what does that imply? B'min b'mino, that's implied. But min b'mino nami achiza in achnasa lo. But only achiza would be allowed. But actually causing two animals of the same type to mate would be a problem. To which they say, no, not necessarily, because my achiza, you could explain achiza as being achnasa. And then it's saying, in a min b'mino, that's totally allowed. Even actually making the action happen. But, right, and why? My kari le'achiza l'shnam alya, right? And then only in kilayim that is forbidden, but in regular animals, right, two of the same type, it's not. And you can understand the source to say that, and it just used achiza as a nice word to really say hachnasa. They didn't want to say it explicitly, and therefore, hachnasa is totally permitted according to this source, or at least according to this way of reading this source, and therefore it doesn't contradict Rav Yehuda. Okay, summary of the daf. Well, actually, let's do one more thing, and then we'll summarize when we get to the next mission. Amar Rav Ashi. We have one more thing about this topic, and then we'll move back to the worker and what the worker can eat on the job. This question was asked from the house of Rav Nechemia, the Reish Galuta. And this is going to be critical in terms of how he answers, and this is an interesting thing about answering different halachic questions to different people in different ways. So here was the exilarch's house that was asking him this question. There were always some issues going on in the exilarch's house. They had a lot of slaves. Also, we're going to see in a minute, because they had a lot of Canaanite slaves, he decided to rule differently than the halacha. Now, if you remember, Rav Papa's question was, can you put two different types in, right, male and female of different types of animals in a pen? And he said, no, not because it's halachically forbidden, but I'm going to be more strict. Now we're going to have Rav Ashi, who adds another stringency to that stringency, which is really rare. Usually, Engels ling zera, it's already removed, but obviously this seemed to be a big issue in those days. Hard for us to imagine. But can you put, let's say, a male and female from the horse family with a cow? Okay, so you have a mean with its mean and a different mean, a different type. Can you put them in a pen together? You assume, well, since it has its type in there, it's going to be attracted to its own type, and you don't have to worry about it mating with the other type. Or do we say no? Don't put those three animals in a deer, because the male might end up mating with the female of the other type. And I forbade it against, I said this is forbidden, but not la halacha. I just went beyond the halacha. Mishum pritzuta da'avde, because of the pritzuta of the avadim. I was worried about all these avadim Knanim who were involved in all sorts of inappropriate things, and I was worried that if we allow this, then that will allow them, they'll end up cross-mating animals and other things, and basically because of their behavior, and there were a lot of them in the Reish Galuta's house, I forbade it. Okay. So what did we do so far? We started with the Rish Lakish Rabbi Yochanan Machloket about Dibur. We got lashes for Dibur in this case, and then Rabbi Yochanan raised a question, and Rish Lakish answered by saying, "Oh, don't worry, that source is just Rabbi Yehuda." We had a little bit of an issue with that, but resolved it. Then we went on to this other Braita about Loka U'Mishalem, and we said, "How can you do that?" It's Kimle, and we gave 3 answers. One of the answers was answered by Rav Papa. From there, they get off on these 2 totally different halachot about baking dairy bread and about putting 2 different types of animals in a pen together. From there, we got off on all of that topic. Now we're back to the worker. We're going to have 2 mishnayot here about different halachot about a worker being able to eat on the job. If you're working only with your hands in the field, but not your legs, or you're working with your feet, like, making wine, for example, and not your hands. Even using your shoulders, you're not even using your hands and your legs. You might be wondering why we're having this whole discussion. In a minute, you'll understand. Even your shoulder, like carrying something, you can still eat on the job. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, no, you have to be working with your hands and your legs. If you're not working with your hands or your legs, only your shoulder, or only your hands, or only your legs, there's no obligation of the employer to allow you to eat. Seems a little strange. In a second, we'll see why. So my time, what's the reason for Tanna Kama and Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda? Ki tavo b'kerem re'echa b'chomai David. So Tanna Kama says, look, it says when you go into your friend's vineyard. Sounds like you can do lots of things in a vineyard. You could do things with your hands. You could do things with your legs. You could carry grapes, anything. So it doesn't matter. It includes everything. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, ad she'aseh biyadav u'beraglav. No, it has to be both. Why both? Instead of looking at the pasuk that talks about the worker, which is, the worker being able to eat, which is what Tanna Kama did, he says, ki shor, it's like the shore. Ma shor ad she'aseh biyadav u'beraglav. So what's the reason for Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda? He said, well, remember what we learned about the shore pasuk? It says, lo tachsom shor b'disho. It didn't need to add the word shore. We would have known, because the animals are the ones who thresh, and it includes all animals. So the word shore was unnecessary. What reason did we say? Oh, it's to make a hekesh between the one who's being chosem, a person, and the shore. So whatever's true for a shore in eating, it's also true for a human. So therefore, for a regular worker. So therefore, just like a shore. Now, how does a shore thresh? With all 4 legs. So basically, in the hind legs are the legs, and the front legs are the hands. And therefore, a person has to be like the shore, using all 4. Okay, 2 hands, 2 legs. So just like the shore only is right, you're only obligated that you can't muzzle the animal when it's using all 4. Also, a worker, ad she'aseh, also hands and also legs. By Rabba bar Rav Huna, here comes the great classic Gemara question, which is going to end in a teiku. We don't know the answer. Dash ba'avazim v'tarnagolim. Why is it a classic Gemara question? Because they want to get at what's going on here. What's at the root of this hekesh? It seems like a strange hekesh. So he says, so what if you have geese and hens? Now, they have legs, right? 2, and they have hands, but their hands are wings. Now, wings can't really do anything. Like, they can make you fly, maybe, but they can't actually, right? And not only whatever, but they can't do work. They're not strong enough to do work. So the Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, what would you say according to him? Would you say, well, the reason why a person is only going to be able to, right, the employer can't prevent you from eating when you're doing both hands and legs is because you have to use everything you have. Now, for these geese and hens, well, they're using all they have, because all they have is their legs. And then, therefore, it would be forbidden to muzzle them. Or do you say, no, hands and legs you need to be using in order to have this isser, this prohibition. And you're not using your hands and your legs, they're not using their wings, so it's not forbidden. And the answer is teiku, as I told you, we don't have an answer. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabbi Ravua. Palim, this is a different issue, which is a little more connected to the next issue, but the next Mishnah, but for some reason it's here. Now, when you're dealing with grapes, there's grapes, and then there's the juice that comes from the grapes, which is the wine. If you're trotting on the grapes to make wine, and you're in the gat, that's the place where the wine press, where they would press the grapes. Now, if you would go in one shti and erev, right, from the weaving, one way and the other way, right? So if you go just like one way and you haven't gone, let's say you go lengthwise and not widthwise in the wine press, then you're still really dealing with grapes. Not a lot of wine has come out of it, and therefore you can't drink the juice from the grapes. You can only eat grapes. Once you've gone length and width, and you've already got more wine coming out of the wine press, then already you can eat. You can either choose to eat grapes or you can choose to drink wine. New Mishnah. If you're picking figs and there happen to be grapes nearby, you can't eat grapes. If you're picking grapes and there's figs nearby, you can't eat figs. You can only eat whatever you're doing, whatever you're picking. But if you're on one row and you see the grapes and they're not so good, but they're nicer on the other row, you can wait and only eat when you get to the really nicer ones and pick the really nicer ones to eat. Even though you might say, well, leave the nicer ones for the owner. No, you can do that. By the way, you can only eat while you're actually working. But mishum, now that's the halacha, the bottom line halacha. But they changed this a little. And they said, in order to return lost items to the owner, which it doesn't really mean lost items. We'll explain this in 1 minute. Okay, from row to row. And when they're coming back from the gat. And when you're in the gat, you're in the wine press, and you run out of grapes, right? You've treaded on all of them. So now you walk back to where the grapes are, and you bring them and you carry them to the gat. Now, when you're on your way back or on the way between rows to go from one row to another to pick, or b'chamor k'shi poreket, or a donkey when she's unloading, you can eat. Okay? Now, what this is saying is the following. If we allow you only to eat on the job, which is what the base halacha is, you're going to end up, while you're working, you're going to stop working to eat. That's going to cause a loss, and that's why we mean returning a lost item to the owner, because you're actually causing a loss. Because instead of working an hour, it took you 5 minutes of that hour to eat. So you're now working 55 minutes. So you're causing a loss to the owner. So while the halacha is only while you're working, the halacha was changed. The rabbi said, we're going to let you, while you're walking from one place to another to get to the next part of your job where you're not really working, you can actually eat, because that way it won't be on your work time. It'll be as you're walking, you're just eating, and that's right. That's the way we basically avoid this loss of your time that you're spending eating while you're supposed to be working. So now we're going to have a question. From here till the end of the daf is basically a question. We're going to deal a little bit with the question, suggest some question on the question, resolve it. And then we're going to try from 3 different lines in our Mishnah to try to get to an answer to this question, but we're not going to succeed. And the last one has 2 different versions. So it'll be like 4. They ask the following question. If I'm dealing with grapes, I can't eat figs. Figs, I can't eat grapes. But what if I'm eating grapes? I'm working with grapes on this row, but I'm eating grapes from a different row. Like, let's say I was in a really nice row. They had excellent grapes. I stuffed a few in my pocket. I moved on to the next row, and I want to take them out of my pocket and eat them. Can I do that? Or I kept them in my hand from the other row. Can I eat a different crop of grapes? Presumably also maybe they're a little different, right? Each one in each row grows a little differently. So can I do that? Do we say, here are the 2 sides. The Mishnah seemed to imply, right? Grapes, but not figs. Figs, but not grapes. But it seemed like grapes and grapes, I could, even if, right, they're from a different row. Oh, Dilma. In other words, and what's the idea? And remember, it says you can't put in your own kelim, but that means you can put in your kelim with the balabayit. So as long as you're putting grapes in the kli for the balabayit, for the owner, so you can eat grapes, whatever type you're putting in there, you can eat. Or Dilma, or maybe it's actually from the actual ones that you're putting in the vessel. So if you have from a different row, right now you're putting in the vessel these, you can only eat these. You can't eat ones that are from a different area. Now, before we get to the answer, like I said, or attempts to answer, we have a question about this. If we say, when you're dealing with one vine, you can't eat from a different one, well, how could a shore ever eat? We had a whole thing that a shore can eat when it's working on mechubar. Now, what a shore usually does is a shore is in the front, pulling a wagon, doing something. So where's the shore eating from? In front, right? And where is he working? The back of him is working. So if you can only eat what you're working on, when a shore is busy dealing with, okay, and there's a whole debate what exactly could be a case of shore mechubar, but I'm not going to get into that. But when a shore is moving forward and eating from over there and working from behind, then he's not eating from the same geffen, let's say, right? Let's say it's a vine. To which the Gemara answers, no, I can explain to you, Amar of Shisha Bered Rav Idi, he explains bishracha, okay, or sracha. There's a debate how to pronounce this word, but it's when there's a very long branch that has some in the front and some in the back. It's all part of the same branch. If you have a really long one, then you could have a case of a shorba mechubar that's eating. Okay, but now let's try to get to our answer. Tashma, the obvious answer is what I kind of alluded to, which is hayav sebeteinim lo yochal banavim. Right? If you're eating grapes, you can't eat figs, or you're eating figs, you can't eat grapes. But that seems to imply that if it were the same item, tainim and tainim, figs and figs, but like figs and grapes, meaning from different rows, you could eat it, because that's not what the Mishnah said. The Mishnah said two different types you can't eat, but it sounds like one type that's like two different types you can. And if you say, if you're in one row, you can't eat from the vine in the other row, how could you ever have a case of that then? Because you wouldn't have a case of that, where you could eat two different types, because it says you can't, right? So therefore, it must be, if they're talking about that kind of case, as if they're saying, again, grapes can't eat figs, figs can't eat grapes, but it sounds like grapes, you could eat other grapes that are different from it, then you wouldn't, right? It would obviously be then you could eat from a different row. To which Amar of Shisha Bered of Idi b'mudle. No, the Mishnah specifically takes grapes and figs, not because we're talking about from two different places, and then from two different places the same item you could. No, it's talking about, if you know, right? Vines grow, they kind of I can't think of the word. They drape themselves onto, right, and they catch on to other things. So when they say grapes you can't eat figs, figs you can't eat grapes, they're talking about a case where you had a fig tree which had grapes that are hanging over the figs. Now, in this case, what are you doing? When you're picking, let's say, figs from the tree, you have to pick up the grapevines to move them, because otherwise you can't get to all the figs. So you're actually dealing with both in your work. But comes the Mishnah to teach you, only the one that you're picking is the one you can eat, even though you're actually dealing with both. And then you can't make any sort of inference to two grapes, right? Grapes on two different vines. So that doesn't work. Second attempt. Tashma. You can prevent yourself, right? Stop yourself from eating here. Wait till you get to the really nice spot. Now, where the grapes are really good. Now, if you could just eat in a different row, you wouldn't have to, the Mishnah wouldn't have to tell you, you wait to eat. What could you simply do? Bring the grapes from the other row and eat them while you're doing this row. You don't have to push it off and wait till you get there. To which the Gemara answers, and we saw this answer in a different situation, not today. We don't let you go, skip your row, go to a different row, grab all these beautiful grapes, come back to your row, because that's really going to cause you a big waste of time in your job. You're going to be wasting a lot of time to do that. That you can't do because you're on the clock of your owner. But what was our question? Same thing we talked about a different case. What we were talking about is if you have a wife and son who can bring you grapes from a different row, then can you, right? Then can you eat them? That's our question. But the Mishnah was talking about a case where you're alone and you're obviously not going to go to the other row and bring them back, because that for sure you can't do because of your work hours. It has nothing to do with the topic we're talking about. Tashma, third attempt. As I told you, we're going to have two different versions here. So now we just read that line, but we're going to explain it a little differently than we explained it before. Savruah, when they heard this, now what did they say? Only when you're working, but the rabbis permitted it even when you're going from row to row. Savruah, when they heard this, they thought that what this Mishnah meant was, they thought that mehalech ka'osema said, not really the way we explained it. We thought that moving from row to row, you're not really working. You're just getting to the next spot. But theoretically, you could look at this in two different ways. When you walk from one row to the other, is that part of your job or is it not part of your job? So they thought at first it is part of your job. Moving from row to row is considered part of your job, because how are you going to get to the other row if you don't walk there? So if it's part of your job, then theoretically you should be able to eat grapes. You should be able to do this. And the Mishnah said you can't do it. So why can't you do it? Well, think about it. If I'm going from row 1 to row 2, what grapes am I eating? Well, I'm eating grapes from row 1. I haven't even gotten to row 2 yet. But my job is really right now, I'm going to row 2. So my job is associated with row 2, which means, right? But the Mishnah, remember, said it's only because of you're wasting time on the job. Alma, well, from there we can learn that what could be the problem if you're actually on the job? The only problem is that you can't eat from the first row while you're doing work for the second row. And on your way to the second row is really work for the second row. So it must be that by Torah law you can't, because you can't eat fruits from one to the other. But the rabbis permitted it in this situation so that you don't waste your time on the job. That would be a way to understand. Then we'd have an answer to our question. You can't, unless it's between row to row, right, while you're on the way. To which they say, no, no, that's not the issue. You really could eat. The problem here is that you're not on the job, because we don't view you're walking from one to the other as part of your job. That was attempt number 1 and rejection. Attempt number 2 of the same source. Some people say, Savrua, it's the reverse. They thought that when you're walking, it's not really considered part of your job. And the reason why we thought you can't eat is what we thought when we read this Mishnah, because you're not considered on the job. What does that infer? Let's say I was walking there carrying equipment. Then it's part of my job. So now what will we say? The reason I can't do this is because I'm not actually doing any work while I'm doing it. But what if I was doing work? I could eat. Now, what would I eat? I'd eat from row 1 while I'm schlepping your machinery. I'm eating from row 1 while I'm on my way to row 2, or while I'm doing a different job of carrying. So what do you see? I could, okay? And then almost, and then you would see that you're allowed to. But, because remember, it's only when I'm not carrying something that I can't. But otherwise, if I'm carrying it, I can't. To which they say, and they just reject this because they say, no, maybe holech is oseh maaseh, and it is working on the job, and then we explain it the way we explained it before. So there's different ways to explain it. Either which way, we can't come to a conclusion, and we don't end up with an answer to our question. Can you eat from one row to another? So quick review. I know it's a little bit late, but started with Rabbi Yochanan Rish Lakish and the whole thing about Tibur. Brought a question. Rish Lakish answered, oh, it's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Then we brought this Kimle b'derabba minei sugya, where you get malkot and you pay, even though it goes against Kimle. We had 3 possible answers. From there, we got to some other statements for Papa made about dairy bread and about the crossbreeding of animals. Then we got to the Mishnah about it machloket, yadav and raglav, or just, could it be just yadav, just raglav, just your shoulder, right? Anything. And we saw the source for that from the shore. Then we talked about whether you can eat wine, at what stage can you drink wine or only eat grapes. And then we got to this Mishnah about Teinim and Anavim and different types and all that, and about how you could eat when you walk in between so that you don't waste time, even though really, ideally, you're not supposed to. And then we had this question of can you eat negef and acher? We brought 3 sentences from the Mishnah to try to prove it, but we were unsuccessful. And with that, we finished today's daf. Wishing everybody a good day.